You're listening to the Australian Water Association podcast series.
My name is Peter Dredge, and joining me is Mark Jong, Senior Environmental Officer with Southeast Drainage Operations in the South Australian Department for Environment and Water, and Phil Staniford, Principal Civil Engineer and the Manager for KBR's Water and Environment Consulting business in South Australia and Western Australia. Welcome, gentlemen.
Good morning, Peter.
Yeah, good morning, Peter.
Mark and Phil were both involved in the Southeast Flows Restoration Project. Mark was manager for the last 2 years of the project, and Phil was the project manager and lead civil engineer for the project. During the extreme conditions of the Millennium Drought, flows down the River Murray into the Coorong reached unprecedented low levels, resulting in an ecological collapse of the Coorong South Lagoon. The Southeast Flows Restoration Project was a response to this. Mark, can you give us some context of, firstly, the region we're in, and secondly, what the project was established for?
Thank you, Peter. So the southeast region, if you look at a map of South Australia and you have Adelaide, look down and slightly to the right to the southeast of Adelaide and travel for about 2 hours, you meet the top of the southeast region, and it extends towards Mount Gambier in the lower southeast and against the western border of Victoria. If we looked at the southeast region 150 years ago, you would have had a vision of vast floodplains and wetland areas. Over 40% of the southeast region was inundated to some extent, and a lot of that was inundated permanently. With colonisation of the area, the governments of the day introduced a drainage scheme. And the intention of that was to relieve the landscape of water and allow for agricultural production. Over the last 150 years, we've developed a network of 2,500 kilometres of drains. And most recently, after World War II, a lot of that discharge was to the ocean. This project had 3 key objectives. One was to provide water to help manage the salinity of the Coorong South Lagoon. Secondly, to hydrate wetlands that exist en route towards the Coorong South Lagoon. And thirdly, to reduce the discharge of drainage water to the ocean beach at Kingston Southeast.
Now, Mark, can you give our audience an understanding of the impacts the Millennium Drought had on the region in light of the much lower flows down the River Murray?
The Millennium Drought affected all communities along the River Murray. And the impacts on the lower lakes and Coorong were dehydration and lowering of water levels. The effect that had on the Coorong, and particularly the Coorong South Lagoon, was a rise in salinity. And if we're trying to keep salinity in the Coorong to be about less than 3 times seawater, well, it rose to about 6 or 7 times that of seawater. So what we saw was an ecological collapse in the Coorong South Lagoon.
And what flow and impacts did that have?
If we consider the role of the Coorong as a refuge in times of drought in the Murray-Darling Basin, there were times recently during drought that over 60% of the water birds that would normally find harbour in the Murray-Darling Basin had to seek refuge in the Coorong and lower lakes, and the Coorong South Lagoon provides that refuge. And if we think in terms of migratory waders, these small birds that fly from the northern hemisphere, they're looking for an environment like the Coorong South Lagoon for food. Now, the high salinities had an impact on the food web, so we're seeing less food, we're seeing less macroinvertebrates, less fish, less plants. So that food resource wasn't available for those birds to fatten themselves up over summer and then fly their way back to their Arctic breeding grounds.
Phil, I might turn to you now. Can you give us an understanding of what the Southeast Flows Restoration Project was established to do?
So the Southeast Flows Restoration Project was an initiative of the state government with federal government funding to basically look to assist in management of salinity within the Coorong. So addressing some of the challenges that we did see with the Millennium Drought with increasing salinity levels within the Coorong. We're also looking to enhance the flow to wetlands that are along the route of the Southeast Flows Restoration Project, and also looking to reduce drainage in outflow from the Blackford Drain in in the south of the project to Kingston Beach, which is near Kingston southeast.
Phil, the scale of works required seems enormous. Can you give us a sense of how big the project was?
The project was significant. Its objective was to transfer up to 600 megalitres per day of water from the southern end of the system up to the northern end. And to do this, that required the construction or enhancement of almost 100 kilometres of drainage channel. 13 kilometres of this alignment was completely new drainage channel, so constructed as a trapezoidal drain cut into the natural earth. And a further 81 kilometres of the alignment was enhancement or upgrade of existing drainage corridor. Along this 94 kilometres of drainage corridor, there were over 120 crossings and structures that were installed. To construct everything within the project, there was around 3.5 million cubic metres of bulk excavation required, which is a significant quantity.
So, Phil, give us a little bit more detail around the complexity of the design and what was required to satisfy not just environmental needs, but stakeholders.
So of those 120 crossings or structures that I spoke about, many of them had different functions. Some of them were constructed to allow the management of groundwater within a particular area, so to actually retain water within the floodway. Others were constructed to allow the crossing of fauna from one side of the drainage corridor to the other, because you can imagine that this is a long linear blockage for the migration of fauna from east to west. Some of the other structures also had multi-function purposes, so to allow water either to continue down the floodway or to actually elevate water within the floodway and allow diversion out of that floodway into a wetland en route. We also had the important function of maintaining drainage within the agricultural land that the landholders rely upon along the drainage corridor. So to achieve this, there are a number of swale drains that were cut and discharge points that allowed discharge of accumulated water into the floodway. So it was actually very complex, a number of different demands and requirements within the various structures that were designed to ensure that we provided the landholders with the drainage service, provided the objective around transfer of the certain quantity of water and the ability to irrigate wetlands, as well as allow fauna to cross the drainage corridor at defined locations.
Mark, I'm assuming there was a lot of very interested stakeholders. Can you give me an idea of the list of stakeholders involved and the degree of collaboration that was sought?
Very early on in the project, it was recognised that there would be an imposition on local landholders. In particular, they're going about their daily business, and we walk in with an initiative to not only acquire land from them, but also impede their property operations by constructing a drain across their property. So we invested a lot of time, firstly, in local landholders. Secondly, we had to invest effort around broader stakeholder engagement as well. Water is a very emotional topic throughout the nation, and it's no less in the southeast. So we had to garner some form of social licence to undertake these works. So that involved traditional owner groups, conservation groups, non-government organisations. Local councils were important, but also the organisation that I work for is called the South Eastern Water Conservation and Drainage Board. So they're the managers of the drainage network. And that engagement process was very deliberate. We intended to be very honest and transparent. Lots of meetings individually with landholders, lots of group meetings. Not only was the consultation directed to landholders and stakeholder groups, we actually involved them in the governance of the project. So they contributed to the design of the project, and one of the biggest outcomes of the design, an idea from the community changed the design from a channel-only option to a hybrid design, which not only resulted in the construction of the channel that Phil has described, but also the restoration of large areas of wetland that haven't seen water in decades. It was the community consultation that was ultimately a great success of the project.
And Mark, the traditional owners of the lands were also involved in collaboration as well?
Absolutely. So traditional owner representation was on a design and environment advisory group. Again, that group which helped assist with the design. Phil was part of that group as well, and they were involved in other steps of the project as well. Not least providing cultural heritage advice and monitoring during construction.
From my perspective, I thought the stakeholder consultation was actually excellent. It was refreshing to see the way a client proactively engaged with so many stakeholders within the community. And I think it was really the culmination of a whole lot of discussions and thought processes as we stepped through the various stages of the design that actually derived the ultimate solution. As Mark was describing, it changed the course of what we initially set out to design. And that's really one of the key innovations within this project.
Mark, how have you measured the success of the project? Have you got any metrics that you can share?
So the project was completed in May 2019, and the 2019 winter was a little bit too dry for us to really test out the infrastructure. So we're still looking forward to collecting that information. And in the spirit of the consultation with the landholders, with that conversation in mind, what we've said to the landholders is we won't know how this thing is going to react under a variety of different flows. It'll take us 5 years to learn. And by the way, we need you to help us to understand how this thing works. So we maintain contact with the landowners to help give us that information as well. And we'll learn from that over time. Equally, the new structures which deliver water to wetlands, which include overpasses that keep fresher surface water separate from saltier drain water. We'll learn how those structures function in the next few years. So looking forward to a wetter winter to test the infrastructure out, and certainly a wetter winter to supply water to our en route wetlands.
Phil, what's your main takeout from this project? Obviously, it appears to be a great success. What are you most proud of?
I'm most proud of the way that the project team members collaborated to come up with innovative design solutions. The project team kept negotiations and discussions happening with stakeholders and landholders right across the alignment. And that really derived some of the successful outcomes of the project. So there's some large engineering works that are part of the overall project, which are pleasing from an engineering perspective. But I think it's really the way the project team collaborated together to derive the final solution.
And Mark, what about you? What are you most proud of?
Yeah, I'll echo Phil's sentiments there, and include the construction contractors too, who not only produced a very high quality works, they're also very easy to work with, and that collaborative nature of the project shone through. Beyond that, though, there are a couple other features, and it really only dawned on us after the project was completed, what we had done on a regional scale. This is the first time in 150 years that we've restored flows along a natural flow path by reversing 150 years of drainage practice. For 150 years, water had been diverted out to the ocean. From a regional scale, when we're grasping with climate change and the need to improve our water management, that is something to really hang our hats on. And also the restoration of 4,100 hectares of the Tilly Swamp watercourse. What that did was increase the wetland estate in the upper southeast by 10%. So now we've got 40,000 hectares of wetland connected to our drainage network that we can deliver environmental flows to achieve some environmental outcomes. And from a senior environmental officer perspective, that is just something to be tremendously proud of.
I've been speaking with Mark de Jong, Senior Environmental Officer with Southeast Drainage Operations in the South Australian Department for Environment and Water, and Phil Staniford, Principal Civil Engineer and the Manager for KBR's Water and Environment Consulting business in South Australia and Western Australia. Thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Peter.